Olá, seja bem-vindo ao Campo Diplomático, espaço dedicado às relações do Brasil com o mundo. Eu sou Catiúcia Sotomayor e hoje converso com o chefe de missão e encarregado de negócios de Singapura no Brasil, Desmond Ng. Formado em ciência política com mestrado em relações internacionais, estudou ainda a cultura japonesa no Japão. Ele ingressou no Ministério das Relações Exteriores em 1994, sendo destacado para a missão permanente de Singapura nas Nações Unidas em Nova York, na Embaixada de Singapura no Japão, nas Filipinas e na Arábia Saudita. No Ministério das Relações Exteriores, ocupou cargos importantes no Departamento de Protocolo, no Departamento da Associação das Nações do Sudeste Asiático e no Departamento Consular. Está no Brasil desde 2018. Welcome and thank you so much for your presence here, Excellency.
Thank you, Katusha, for giving me this opportunity to speak about Singapore and our relations with Brazil.
That's really important because we know that Brazil is the first country that you established diplomatic relations since after the independence, right?
That's right. Brazil was the first country in Latin America to recognize Singapore after we became independent in 1965.
And how are our relations nowadays?
We have a very good, close and long-standing relationship with Brazil. Brazil is the largest trading partner for Singapore in Latin America. And we have our only embassy in Latin America is here in Brasilia.
And what about the trading? You told me that we sell a lot, right? But we also buy a lot, right?
We have very good trade relations with Brazil. We have the bilateral trade in goods is about 20 billion reais in 2020. Bilateral trade in services was about 12 billion reais. And in terms of foreign direct investments by Singapore into Brazil, in 2019, the figure was 6 billion reais. We import, in fact, Brazil is the largest supplier of frozen meat to Singapore. You supply us with frozen chicken, frozen beef, and frozen poultry, pork. This is a very mutually beneficial relationship. As you know, Singapore is food scarce. We import 90% of our food from all over the world, more than 170 countries. And we only produce less than 10%. However, this percentage leaves us very vulnerable to external shocks and supply chain disruptions. And so therefore, it is important for Singapore to have food security. And we do have a plan to improve our food security.
So let's talk a little bit about that, because you told me that even though you produce this only 10%, you want to be, your vision is to become the largest, the most important producer in Asia. Is that right?
Yes, Katusha. It's a very ambitious plan, but I think Singapore is always thinking big and preparing for the future. We have a 30 by 30 plan. What do I mean by 30 by 30? Is that we aim to produce 30% of our food needs by the year 2030. How do we do this, given our land constraints? We are doing our best to adopt technologies, farming technologies that are resource efficient, climate resilient, and productive in order to boost up our production, agricultural production. We are trying to use innovation and advances in agro-technology in order to boost this production. This is part of our vision to become, as you say, Katusha, the leading hub in Asia for agriculture, urban agriculture, and aquaculture.
And food security also.
Yes, this is, of course, this plan, of course, is part of this 30 by 30 plan, is to bolster our food security. Because we recognize that an over-reliance on foreign food imports will make us very vulnerable. And we like to reduce that vulnerability and become more independent, self-reliant on food production.
I see the only way to get there is with technology. Just because you are a really small country, you have the size of Salvador, right? One of our cities here. And you told me that you are trying to invest in technologies and innovation and little things like producing strawberries inside of homes. How does that work?
Yes, well, innovation is a key cornerstone of our development. We want to develop into a knowledge-based, technology-driven economy in order to increase our economic competitiveness. In order to do that, we need to, as I mentioned earlier, rely on farming technologies that are climate resilient, resource efficient, given our land constraints. So innovation is extremely important for us. In fact, we want to boost up our production in urban agriculture and aquaculture. And one of the ways is actually our focus is going now into alternative proteins. What do I mean by alternative proteins? It is proteins derived from plant-based proteins and cultured meat. We are beginning to go into this area, and we see alternative proteins as a potential game changer because it can be produced in large amounts using relatively small amounts of labor and land.
Now, you told me there is an aquaculture innovation center there. How does it work?
Singapore has an aquaculture innovation center, which we established in 2018. The center is actually a multi-consortium effort led by 11 research institutes, government agencies, universities, and polytechnics. What it does is that it cooperates and co-innovates. It shares its facilities, its technologies, its intellectual property resources, and this is all with the common objective of serving the needs, specific needs of our local aquaculture enterprises, such as fish farms, farms growing eggs, farms growing vegetables. So with this expertise and innovation, the center is aimed at serving the needs of these enterprises and helping them to produce more and better.
So that's, of course, another example of how science and technology are important to get there. But and what about cooperation? How does this apply to our relation between Brazil and Singapore?
Yes, definitely. Our relationship is very good. In fact, right now we are working with Brazilian companies, especially startups. We are encouraging Brazilian companies to co-innovate and create new solutions with Singapore companies with the aim of boosting and growing our agrotechnology industry. So for example, we have in Singapore in 2020, we had the Singapore Week of Technology and Innovation. And this was where we invited Apex Brazil to give a talk to the audience and to advise interested companies on how to venture into Brazil, into the Brazilian market, especially for startups. At the same time, we also have an annual startup competition. We call it Slingshot. Cool name, but the competition is to encourage startups. And we are attracting Brazilian companies to participate in these competitions. The idea, of course, is that we want Brazilian companies not only to work with us, but also to establish themselves within the Singapore's startup ecosystem. so that they can work with us to come up with new ideas and new technologies, and together we will benefit.
So to get there, one of the key areas is the ongoing agreement negotiation of Mercosur Free Trade Agreement, right?
That's right. Yes. Well, at the moment we are negotiating with Mercosur, of which Brazil is the largest economy and the most important member. I think we are very clear about that. And we are negotiating a free trade agreement with Mercosur. The free trade agreement, Singapore has many free trade agreements. We have more than 26 free trade agreements with countries all over the world. But with Latin America, we are working, Mercosur is certainly such an important bloc that we want to establish a similar agreement with Mercosur. This agreement we feel is very important because once completed, we will be able to the agreement will encourage companies from both Singapore and Brazil to consider investing more in each other's economies. And I think more importantly, the free trade agreement will be a very important signal to the international community that we should remain open for international trade. And this, of course, is not a given, especially when you see what happened in the aftermath of the pandemic. There were countries that began to look inwards and began to retreat from international cooperation and turning a bit insular, a bit protectionistic. And I think we need to prevent that from happening. Free trade agreements are a very good way to ensure that we remain open for international trade.
And it would cover issues related to, I don't know, sanitary barriers and access to the market, right? What
Yes.
are you trying to get with this FTA?
The FTA is really Singapore's way of signaling to Brazil and, of course, the other members of Mercosur that we want to engage. We want to engage with Brazil, with Latin America. Traditionally, we have not spent a lot of time in Latin America. We are a small country, and we have been traditionally focused on Asia Pacific. But this is certainly the time to engage further. And we believe that Latin America has tremendous potential, and free trade agreements such as these will help to unlock the potential so that we can really benefit, from economic cooperation and from increased trade and investments.
So the pandemic, we can say that it reinforced the need of having safe partners, right? How is your country working with that? Because we know it's really difficult to access some markets because you have strict rules, right? How is that in Singapore?
Well, in Singapore, I think because we are so food dependent, we pay very careful attention to the hygiene and the sanitary standards of food that we import. And I think that's important because if we have to ensure that the food is of top quality and is safe for consumption. In that respect, we have been very happy with Brazil. We know it's a wonderful relationship. There's no surprise why Brazil is the single largest supplier of frozen meat to Singapore, because the meat is good and the meat is safe, and reasonably priced. So we have an agency called the Singapore Food Agency. They are responsible for ensuring that the food that we import goes through inspection and to ensure that they are of high safe standards. And we have not had any problems with Brazil. So that's wonderful.
And what you can say are the main challenges we have to do today together, more than the pandemic?
Yes, I think the COVID-19 pandemic has reinforced the importance of working closely with close, trusted, and reliable partners like Brazil. We saw in the pandemic that supply chain connectivity was disrupted. things were not going to where they were supposed to go because of disruptions, and countries turning more insular and protectionistic. And this has reinforced the importance of working with like-minded partners like Brazil. And I think it is testament to the strength and resilience of our supply chain infrastructure between our two countries that the food exports from Brazil continued to enter Singapore throughout the pandemic. That was excellent and a real testament of the strength of our relationship.
And what about opportunities? What can we say that the Brazilian producer can achieve trying to get to Singapore?
Yes, I think there are many opportunities for Brazilian companies to work with Singapore. As I mentioned earlier, we are encouraging Brazilian startup, especially agri-food companies and Brazilian startup companies to co-innovate with us, to establish themselves within our startup ecosystem so that we can work together to produce better quality food products that can benefit our customers, consumers. Right now, we have a whole of government approach to improving and ramping up our agro-technology industry. How do we do this? As I mentioned earlier, we are relying on the climate resilient, resource efficient farming technologies in our effort to become a urban agriculture and aquaculture center in the region. Now, to do this, we need innovation. We need advances in farming technologies. We know that Brazil is famous. Brazil is well known for the use of technology in your agricultural processes. And even though Singapore is mainly focused on urban agriculture, we believe that some of the technologies that Brazil employs can be relevant for Singapore. So we can learn from Brazilian companies and use their best practices and adapt them for our local use. And likewise, I think that as Singapore develops our ability to boost our production in urban agriculture, we believe that some of the lessons that we learned can be shared with Brazilian companies in order to help Brazilian crops increase in yield and sustainability.
But can you share with us some kind of public policies that we could try and replicate here in Brazil?
I think it's like a student learning from the master. You know, Brazil is such an agricultural powerhouse, and we want to learn so much from Brazil. If it's anything that I think that maybe we could share in terms of a lesson, is that probably we have adopted a whole of government approach. And what do I mean by that is that we're all focused on that vision, and we are all working together. So as I mentioned earlier in our Aquaculture Innovation Center, that's a multi-consortium effort. It has government agencies, it has universities, research institutes, and we are even bringing in foreign expertise. So that probably could be an example, is that working together, sharing expertise, sharing facilities even, co-sharing, co-cooperating. I think you bring synergies, synergies into the effort. And probably that is one area that maybe we could share with our Brazilian friends.
But do you think without the free trade agreement with Mercosur yet, do you think it's easy to access your market and to strengthen this relationship, to expand Brazilian business in Singapore?
Yes, I think definitely the fact that we import so much food from Brazil. Singapore has always been open, ever since the modern history of Singapore. We have remained an open and free port city. And so beyond the trade relationship, the free trade agreement is really an important signal that we want to expand our political, diplomatic, and economic engagement of Latin America, of which Brazil is the most important member. And I think once we do that, because the world is changing, I wanted to also mention that the pandemic has shown us that technology and digital innovation is the key to the future. You know, we were able to continue meeting throughout the pandemic because of modern technology, you know, Zoom and everything and all these technologies. So technology is here to stay and will continue to play a big, if not greater part in the future. Now, technology is important, I think, for Singapore and Brazil because it helps us overcome the constraints of geography and distance. As you know, we are so far apart. But technology helps us to close that gap. And this allows us to leverage, technology allows us to leverage our economies so that it can unlock the potential, you know, to unlock the full potential of our economies. We actually have signed digital economy cooperation agreements with some countries because this is one area that we're going into. The digital economy and everything presents with it a different set of issues. You know, cyber security, cyber theft. These are all issues that everyone is looking into. And we are actually looking for partners, for like-minded countries where we can sign similar agreements so that we can work together to address these new digital economy issues and move in this direction. And certainly we hope Brazil can be one such friend for us to work together on the digital economy.
Yes, and just like you mentioned, the technology is here to stay, just as the fact that we have to deal with the climate change and to invest to get the sustainability with the productivity. So how can we work all these subjects together, the three of them, the sustainability, the climate change, and the technology, and how can we do it, Brazil and Singapore?
I think definitely for us, innovation is the way forward. Innovation, relying on technologies that are climate resilient. I think that's so important because with widespread, wide-scale, large-scale livestock production, certainly there is an impact on climate change. But if we are to rely more on technologies, we can use technologies to cut down on carbon emissions and reduce the impact of climate change. It is a big challenge, but I think technology provides us with a way forward. And so in that sense, Singapore is looking at innovation. You know, there's no other way but innovation and using the best modern technologies to scale up. You, Katusha, you were mentioning earlier that we had strawberries, and I wanted to talk about this. You know, Singapore is focused on urban agriculture. For example, vertical farms, we call it. Farms that are built inside a building that is maybe like 20 stories high. And Singapore, one such vertical farm has actually produced strawberries. You will be amazed that a country like Singapore, situated in the equator, can produce strawberries. But thanks to technology, we have been able to do that. I hear that the strawberries are sweet and maybe a bit expensive, but very sweet. So hopefully if we can produce more, we can bring down the price and provide something that is a delicacy to many people.
Now, another thing that is a delicacy to many people is the carrot cake. But here in Brazil, we have a different one, right? Tell me a little bit about the kind of carrot cake you have in Singapore.
Oh, okay. Well, I wasn't prepared to answer this question. But carrot cake is a traditional
Dessert?
It is a dish. It is not a dessert. It is a dish. It is a dish. It is a traditional Chinese dish that is made of Chinese radish. It is fried and mixed with all kinds of condiments and sauce.
But it's typical from your country,
It is a
right?
typical dish, and people eat it for breakfast.
Without carrot and without
There's no carrot at all. There's no carrot at all, but it is a delicious, a bit unhealthy dish, but very delicious.
Now, more than the differences between the food that we have here, what do you think is the most interesting things that we have in common that I'd like to know actually, what do you think about our country and how do you feel about being here in Brazil since 2018? And I'd like to know what you would like to share with us about your vision of Brazil.
Well, I first fell in love with Brazil when I watched the Brazilian soccer team play in 1982. I was a young teenager, but watching players like Falcao, Zico, Socrates was amazing. And since then, I've been supporting them. You know, every time at the World Cup, I support them.
Even against Singapore?
Well, Brazil will always beat Singapore, you know, so there's no competition. But I also had the opportunity to visit Brazil in 1997 when I was working in New York. I came here because I wanted to see Copacabana Beach and Christ, the Redeemer. They were such famous, sites in Brazil. I never imagined that 20 years later I would come back here as the head of mission of the Singapore Embassy. And to me, it is not a coincidence. To me, I think, I was being prepared to come to Brazil and the passion and my like for Brazil, made it so much easier, for me to come and to start my work here.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency, for your time. It was lovely.
Thank you, Katusha.
E no campo diplomático de hoje, nós falamos sobre as relações comerciais do Brasil com Singapura e a cooperação no agronegócio. Você pode rever este programa e também outras entrevistas no nosso canal no YouTube. Aproveite para seguir a gente nas redes sociais, @AgroMaisTV. Continue com a programação do AgroMais, seu canal voltado para o agronegócio 24 horas. Obrigada pela companhia. A gente se vê.